Welcome to our channel. Today's story follows Marcus Lane, a man whose simple trip to the grocery store takes a shocking turn. A heated confrontation erupts when he's accused of stealing a parking spot by a stranger, Karen, whose accusations soon turn personal and physical. Faced with public humiliation and a court battle, Marcus chooses to stand his ground, discovering inner strength he never knew he had. But what will the fallout mean for Karen? And how does Marcus turn this painful experience into a story of resilience that impacts his entire community? If you're curious to see how one moment can change lives, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments. What would you do in Marcus's place? Now let's get into the parking lot encounter. Marcus Lane was ready for a calm weekend. After a long, exhausting week at work, he looked forward to nothing more than a quiet day with some grocery shopping and a peaceful afternoon to himself. The sun was shining, casting a warm glow over the streets of his neighborhood as he pulled into the parking lot of the local grocery store, a place he knew well. It was a typical Saturday morning, and the parking lot was busy. People hustled between their cars and the store, parents wrangling kids, elderly couples moving slowly with carts. Marcus was in no hurry. He adjusted his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of himself. Even with hints of gray starting to show in his beard, his calm demeanor made him appear younger. A middle school counselor by trade, Marcus had spent his life helping kids navigate their challenges and traumas. Today, he felt content. He was in a good place. As he pulled into a parking spot near the front, he noted the luck of finding one so close on such a bustling day. Smiling to himself, he turned off the engine, unbuckled his seatbelt, and opened his door. But before he could step out, he heard the screech of tires. He looked up, startled. To his left, a large white SUV had pulled up sharply, its driver glaring out the window. The woman behind the wheel had a tense look on her face. She was in her mid-40s, with highlighted hair pulled into a tight ponytail, and a slight scowl that only deepened when her gaze landed on Marcus. She rolled down her window and leaned halfway out, pointing a finger aggressively. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the parking lot. "That was my spot. I had my blinker on." Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned by the sudden accusation. "Excuse me?" he replied, keeping his voice calm. "I was waiting for that spot," she snapped, pushing her door open with a force that made it clear she was used to getting her way. She stepped out, her eyes blazing as she strode over to Marcus's car, practically invading his space. The confrontation escalated quickly. Marcus stood beside his car, watching as this stranger, who hadn't even bothered to introduce herself, launched into an attack. Her voice grew louder as she stepped closer, her words laced with frustration and anger. "I had my blinker on. You people always act like you own the place," she spat, gesturing at the parking spot, as if it were prime real estate. Her tone was tinged with disdain, as though Marcus had committed a personal affront just by existing in her space. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he stayed calm, holding his ground. Years of working with troubled kids had taught him the importance of staying level-headed in the face of aggression. "Ma'am, I didn't see anyone waiting. The spot was open when I pulled in," he said, his tone firm but respectful. Her eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms, her posture confrontational. "Of course you didn't see me," she scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "People like you never do." The phrase hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult that cut deeper than any shout or shove could. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, the familiar ache of frustration bubbling up inside him. He'd heard comments like that before, casual words that weren't casual at all. It was a reminder of every slight, every moment he'd been made to feel less than, simply because of who he was. But he refused to let her see how much it bothered him. "I'm sorry if you were waiting," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "But I didn't see you." Her response was a harsh laugh, mocking and dismissive. "Oh, sure. Always the same excuse with you people. Entitled, disrespectful, thinking the rules don't apply." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting to keep his cool. He glanced around and noticed a few people had stopped to watch, drawn by the rising tension. He knew this could get ugly if he didn't handle it carefully. "Look, ma'am, it's just a parking spot," he said, hoping to defuse the situation. "I'm just here to get some groceries." The woman's face twisted in a sneer, her anger only seeming to grow at his calm demeanor. She took a step closer, pointing a finger at his chest. "People like you are nothing but trouble," she said, her voice rising with each word. "You come into nice neighborhoods, thinking you can do whatever you want. I bet you don't even live around here." Marcus's patience was wearing thin, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Where I live has nothing to do with this," he replied, his voice measured. "Of course it does," she shouted, practically shaking with anger. "This is what happens when they let people like you into our communities. You think you can just take whatever you want. Well, I've had it with your type." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, a familiar sense of anger and frustration building inside him. He glanced around, noticing more people watching, some with phones out, recording. He didn't want this to escalate. Didn't want to be the center of another viral video for all the wrong reasons. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to remain calm. "I'm not doing this with you," he said, turning to walk toward the store. "It's just a parking spot. Let's leave it at that." But before he could take more than a few steps, he felt a sharp shove from behind. He stumbled, catching himself just before he fell. He spun around, his patience finally snapping. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice louder than he intended. The woman, Marcus had mentally dubbed her Karen by this point, stood her ground, her eyes blazing with fury. "Oh, I'll tell you what's wrong. You don't get to walk away from me," she shouted, stepping even closer. Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. He knew how this looked. A black man in a confrontation with an angry white woman. He knew how it could be perceived, how quickly things could spiral out of control. "Lady, walk away before you do something you'll regret," he warned, his voice steady but firm. He didn't want to push her, but he was done being pushed himself. Her sneer only deepened, and then, without warning, she lashed out. Her hand swung through the air, fast and sharp, connecting with Marcus's face in a slap that echoed across the parking lot. The sting radiated across his cheek and jaw, a hot, humiliating pain that made his head spin. Marcus stood there, stunned, his mind racing. The slap wasn't just physical. It was a declaration, a statement that she thought she could hit him, degrade him, without consequence. Every fiber of his being wanted to respond, to show her that he wasn't going to just take this. But he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew better than to retaliate, knew how easily things could be turned against him if he did. Instead, he looked her in the eye, his voice cold and steady. "You don't get to put your hands on me." The woman, Karen, stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and anger. She hadn't expected him to stand his ground. For a moment there was silence between them, a tense, charged moment where neither of them moved. And then, as if realizing she'd crossed a line, she took a step back, her face contorting with anger. "You're going to regret this," she spat, her voice venomous. "I'll make sure of it." As Marcus stood there, reeling from the slap, he noticed the small crowd of bystanders who had gathered, some recording on their phones. He felt a mixture of emotions, anger, frustration, and humiliation. He had spent years cultivating a calm, unshakable demeanor in the face of adversity. But now, for the first time in years, he felt the sting of helplessness. One of the onlookers, a young woman, stepped forward hesitantly. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. Marcus took a deep breath, nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, though his voice betrayed the hurt he felt inside. His cheek still throbbed, a reminder of the indignity he had just endured. As he turned to leave, the woman, Karen, as he'd taken to calling her in his mind, shouted after him, "Don't think this is over. You'll regret what you did." Ignoring her words, Marcus walked into the store, trying to shake off the weight of the encounter. But the whispers and stares of other customers reminded him that he couldn't simply escape the situation. The incident was fresh, raw, and he knew it wouldn't fade easily. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his living room, still trying to process what had happened. He had called his sister, Samantha Lane, a lawyer, to tell her about the encounter. Samantha, always protective, listened carefully, her tone shifting from concern to anger as he recounted the details. "Marcus, this woman assaulted you. She invaded your personal space, threatened you, and even slapped you in public. We can't just let this go," Samantha said, her voice fierce with determination. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, Sam, but I'm just so tired. I didn't even want to react. I just wanted to walk away. I get that. I do, Samantha replied, her voice softening. But you need to take a stand. For yourself, and for anyone else who might face this kind of treatment. After a moment, Marcus nodded, realizing she was right. He agreed to file a police report the next day, hoping that some form of justice could come out of this mess. Marcus arrived at the police station the next morning with Samantha by his side. He felt a surge of apprehension as he entered the building, unsure of how the authorities would handle the situation. But Samantha's confidence bolstered him, and he followed her lead as she guided him through the process of filing a report. As they spoke to an officer, Samantha provided a clear account of the events, emphasizing the physical assault and Karen's aggressive behavior. The officer took notes and asked questions, his expression neutral but attentive. Marcus could tell he was assessing the situation carefully. Are there any witnesses? The officer asked. Marcus nodded. There were a few people watching. I'm sure someone must have recorded it. We'll request the store's security footage, and if possible, we'll reach out to any witnesses who come forward, the officer assured them. Leaving the station, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He knew he'd taken the first step toward holding Karen accountable, but he also knew the road ahead would be challenging. People often judged based on appearances, and he worried about how others might perceive him. Days later, a video of the incident surfaced online. Someone in the crowd had uploaded it, and it quickly gained traction, sparking debates and discussions across social media. The video showed Karen approaching Marcus, her voice shrill and her body language aggressive. Though the footage didn't capture every word, it clearly showed her slap and Marcus's calm reaction. Comments flooded in, with people voicing their opinions, sympathies, and judgments. Some defended Karen, claiming she was simply frustrated. Others sided with Marcus, applauding his restraint and condemning Karen's behavior. As Marcus read through the comments, he felt a strange sense of validation. Seeing so many people recognize the injustice he'd faced made him feel less alone. However, there were also comments filled with anger, racism, and hostility, reminding him that not everyone would understand his perspective. Karen, meanwhile, was far from remorseful. The video had not only exposed her behavior but also jeopardized her reputation. Friends and family who had seen the video questioned her actions, and Karen found herself under a new kind of scrutiny she hadn't anticipated. Her lawyer advised her to issue a public apology, but Karen resisted. She was used to getting her way, and the idea of admitting fault felt humiliating. Instead, she filed a counter-complaint, claiming that Marcus had intimidated her and that she had acted out of fear. The complaint complicated matters, and Marcus felt the weight of it pressing down on him. It was no longer just about the slap. It had become a larger battle for his integrity and character. He was determined to see it through, but the emotional toll was beginning to weigh heavily on him. As the days passed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the incident more deeply. He thought about the years he had spent advocating for respect, compassion, and understanding. He had seen the struggles his students faced, many of whom came from backgrounds where they were often marginalized or misunderstood. Now he felt a sense of empathy for them that he hadn't fully grasped before. Marcus struggled with feelings of anger, shame, and helplessness. He felt exposed, like his life had been put under a microscope. Friends and family reached out to support him, but he often found himself retreating into his own thoughts, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions he was experiencing. One evening, as he sat alone on his porch, his thoughts drifted to his father's teachings. His father, a man of great patience and wisdom, had often reminded him of the importance of dignity and self-respect. "Never let anyone make you feel small, son," he would say. "Stand tall even when it's hard." Those words resonated with Marcus, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that this battle wasn't just about him. It was about standing up against injustice, no matter the cost. As the court date approached, Samantha worked tirelessly to build a strong case for Marcus. She gathered witness statements, video evidence, and documentation of the harassment he had endured. The case was complex, with Karen's counter-complaint adding layers of doubt and confusion. Samantha reassured Marcus that the evidence was in his favor, but he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. He knew how easily narratives could be twisted, how quickly people could make assumptions based on appearances. Determined to maintain his dignity, Marcus prepared himself for the courtroom, ready to recount his experience truthfully. He knew it would be a painful process, but he also knew that he had to see it through. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. Marcus entered the courtroom with Samantha by his side, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Karen was already seated with her lawyer, her expression a blend of defiance and discomfort. As the hearing began, Samantha presented their case with clarity and conviction. She recounted the events of the confrontation, emphasizing Marcus's restraint and Karen's aggression. Witnesses took the stand, describing Karen's behavior and affirming Marcus's calm response. Karen's lawyer attempted to paint a different picture, portraying her as a victim of stress who had merely overreacted in a moment of frustration. But the evidence was clear, and the judge listened intently, weighing each piece of testimony. When Marcus took the stand, he spoke from the heart. He described the emotional toll the incident had taken on him, the humiliation of being slapped in public, and the frustration of having his character questioned. His words were measured, sincere, and powerful, and he could see the impact they had on the jury. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Karen was found guilty of assault and property damage. The judge sentenced her to community service and mandated that she complete a bias education program. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him as the verdict was read. It wasn't just about the legal victory. It was a validation of his experiences, a recognition of the pain he had endured. For the first time since the incident, he felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served. As he left the courtroom, Marcus was met with supportive words from friends and strangers alike. He knew that the road to healing would be long, but he also knew that he had taken a meaningful step forward. In this act, Marcus's journey deepens as he faces both the public scrutiny and the personal struggles that follow the incident. Karen's counter-complaint and the societal biases he encounters challenge him emotionally, but he draws strength from his past, his family's values, and his sense of justice. The first emotional climax reaches its peak in the courtroom, where Marcus's integrity is finally validated through the verdict, setting the stage for his continued journey toward personal healing and advocacy. The courthouse steps were crowded with people as Marcus emerged, a quiet mix of relief and exhaustion on his face. Friends and supporters surrounded him, offering words of encouragement, and Marcus nodded appreciatively, though a lingering heaviness remained in his chest. Samantha stood by his side, visibly proud, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Justice served," she said softly, though her voice carried a slight tremor. She too had been deeply affected by the case and the challenges they had faced. "Yeah," Marcus replied, managing a small smile. "But somehow it doesn't feel like it's over." "Not really." As they walked to the car, Marcus felt the weight of what had transpired over the last few weeks. He had achieved a legal victory, but the journey had left its mark. He knew he would need time to process everything, to find peace in the midst of the emotional whirlwind he had endured. For Karen, the verdict had come as a shock. She had spent most of her life avoiding accountability, and now, for the first time, she was forced to confront her actions. Community service, bias education. It felt humiliating. But somewhere deep within, she felt a sliver of guilt and unease creeping in. Karen began her community service at a local shelter, where she was required to interact with people she wouldn't typically encounter. Working alongside those from different backgrounds, she began to realize that the assumptions she had held about others were narrow, shaped by years of ingrained prejudices. Day by day, the experience chipped away at her defenses, forcing her to acknowledge the harm her actions had caused. Back at home, Marcus tried to return to his routine. He resumed work at the middle school, where his students welcomed him back with open arms. Yet he couldn't shake the residual frustration and resentment. Memories of the confrontation lingered, and he found himself replaying the events in his mind, questioning every decision he had made. One evening, as he sat in his quiet living room, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, Daniel, who had seen the video online. Daniel's message was simple but sincere. "Proud of you for standing up. You've always been the calmest, strongest guy I know." The message gave Marcus pause, and for the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the courage it had taken to maintain his composure through the ordeal. He had stayed true to his values, holding himself with integrity in the face of prejudice. Though the journey had been painful, he realized he had emerged with a deeper understanding of his own strength. Several weeks later, while attending a community event, Marcus found himself face-to-face with Karen. She was there as part of her community service, wearing a volunteer badge and looking markedly different. The smug confidence she had once exuded was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost vulnerable expression. Karen approached him cautiously, her voice soft and unsure. "Marcus, I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she began, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I know I hurt you. I've been going through a lot these past few weeks, and I realize now that I was wrong. Terribly wrong." Marcus listened, feeling a mixture of emotions: anger, resentment, and a glimmer of sympathy. He took a deep breath, considering his response carefully. "I appreciate you saying that, Karen," he said finally, his tone calm but guarded. "But an apology doesn't erase what happened." "I know," Karen replied, her voice wavering. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it out loud. For myself." As she walked away, Marcus felt an unexpected sense of closure. Her apology hadn't taken away the pain, but it was a step toward healing. He knew it would be a long journey, but he was finally ready to let go of the anger that had been weighing him down. Inspired by his experience, Marcus decided to take a proactive role in his community. He began speaking at local schools and community centers, sharing his story as a way to educate others about the importance of respect, empathy, and standing up against prejudice. At first he was nervous, uncertain of how his story would be received. But as he stood before his first audience, a group of high school students, he saw the impact his words had on them. Their eyes widened with understanding, and he could sense their empathy as he recounted the pain and resilience that had defined his journey. From that moment on, Marcus dedicated himself to advocacy. He connected with organizations focused on social justice and community healing, working to create spaces where conversations about empathy and inclusivity could thrive. Months passed, and Marcus found himself in a place of newfound peace. He had transformed his pain into purpose, using his story to inspire change in his community. His advocacy had become a source of healing, allowing him to process his trauma while making a positive impact. One evening, he sat with his sister Samantha on his porch, reflecting on the journey they had shared. "You know, I never expected things to turn out like this," he admitted, a gentle smile on his face. "But I feel like I've finally found a way to make peace with everything that happened." Samantha smiled back, her eyes filled with pride. "I always knew you'd find a way to rise above, Marcus. You have a strength that few people possess." As they sat in comfortable silence, Marcus felt a sense of closure. The pain of the incident had faded, replaced by a quiet resilience. He knew that life would always have its challenges, but he also knew that he had the strength to face them, no matter how difficult. With his advocacy work gaining momentum, Marcus found himself increasingly in demand. Schools, community centers, and even local organizations reached out to invite him to share his story. His talks resonated with diverse audiences, and he often received messages from young people expressing gratitude and admiration for his resilience. The experience was healing in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. Each time he recounted his story, he felt himself growing stronger, as though he were reclaiming his dignity and self-worth, piece by piece. His story had taken on a life of its own, inspiring others to challenge prejudice and approach conflict with empathy. One afternoon, Marcus gave a talk at a local university, speaking to a packed auditorium of students. He shared his journey, emphasizing the importance of standing up for oneself without letting anger consume the spirit. As he spoke, he felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing he was making a meaningful impact. After the talk, a young woman approached him, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Lane," she said, her voice trembling. "Hearing your story gave me hope. I've been struggling with similar challenges, and knowing that someone like you made it through gives me strength." Marcus smiled, deeply moved. "I'm glad my story could help you," he replied. "Just remember, You have the strength to overcome anything. Believe in yourself, even when things get tough. One evening, while preparing for a community event, Marcus received an unexpected email. It was from Karen. In a carefully written message, she expressed a sincere apology and shared the lessons she'd learned during her community service and bias education program. "I didn't understand the harm I was causing," she wrote. "Through this experience, I've come to realize how much pain I inflicted, not just on you, but on my own humanity. I know my apology can't change the past, but I hope it can help me become a better person." Marcus read the email twice, letting her words sink in. He hadn't expected her to reach out again, and though he harbored no illusions of friendship, he recognized the courage it took for her to confront her own biases. Her message felt like the final piece of closure he needed, a symbol that his actions had created ripples of change, even in those who had once caused him pain. He typed a short reply thanking her for the apology. Though he would keep a respectful distance, he appreciated her attempt to make amends. For Marcus, this was the kind of growth he hoped for, not just in himself, but in those around him. As the holiday season approached, Marcus spent a quiet evening with his sister, Samantha. They sipped hot cocoa on his porch, bundled against the cold, watching the world outside through a shared sense of calm and accomplishment. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately," Marcus said softly. "He always taught us to stand tall, even when things got tough. I feel like he'd be proud of us." Samantha smiled, her eyes warm. He'd be proud of how you handled everything. You've taken an experience that could have broken you and turned it into something powerful." They shared a moment of silence, comforted by the thought of their father's influence and the values he'd instilled in them. Marcus felt a deep sense of peace, knowing he had honored his father's legacy in a way that mattered. In the new year, Marcus's advocacy took a broader turn. He joined forces with local social justice organizations, working to address systemic issues that often led to confrontations like the one he'd faced. He became a mentor to young people, sharing his story not just as a cautionary tale, but as a beacon of hope and resilience. He collaborated on projects aimed at bridging divides within the community, creating workshops on empathy and cultural understanding. Through his efforts, he connected with people from all walks of life, each encounter reinforcing his belief that change was possible, even in the most unlikely places. One of the workshops he co-led was attended by law enforcement officers, local business owners, and community members. Marcus shared practical strategies for diffusing conflicts and fostering mutual respect, drawing on his own experiences and the lessons he had learned. His message was simple but powerful. Respect and understanding could prevent countless confrontations if only people were willing to listen and empathize. At one of his final talks of the year, Marcus stood before a crowd that included friends, family, and strangers alike. He took a moment to survey the faces before him, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. He had come so far, and now, standing here, he felt a profound sense of purpose. As he spoke, he shared a message he had come to hold close to his heart. We all have the power to choose how we respond to hate, to anger, to injustice. I chose to stand tall, to walk a path of empathy, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I had. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt the weight of their support wash over him. In that moment, he knew he had truly moved beyond the pain of the past. His journey had transformed him, but it had also left a mark on everyone who heard his story. Months later, Marcus received a letter from a young man named Isaiah, who had attended one of his talks. Isaiah wrote about how Marcus's story had given him the courage to stand up to bullying at school, inspiring him to advocate for respect and kindness among his classmates. Reading the letter, Marcus felt a surge of pride. He had planted a seed, and now he saw it growing in others. His story, once a painful memory, had become a powerful force for good. As he finished reading, Marcus looked out the window, a soft smile on his face. He had found his peace, his purpose, and his place in the world. His journey had been difficult, but it had brought him to a place of understanding and fulfillment that he wouldn't trade for anything. With a deep breath, Marcus felt a calm settle over him. a calm that came from knowing he had made a difference, not only in his own life, but in the lives of others. He had taken a painful experience and transformed it into something beautiful, something lasting. And that, he realized, was the truest victory of all. In the years that followed, Marcus's story became a catalyst for positive change in his community. Schools implemented empathy-based programs inspired by his talks. Local businesses held training sessions on inclusivity, and Marcus's advocacy continued to resonate with new generations. As for Karen, she continued her own quiet journey of reflection, working within her community and gradually transforming her own life. She was humbled by her experience, and though she knew she could never undo the harm she'd caused, she committed herself to personal growth. Marcus and Karen crossed paths once more at a community event, exchanging a respectful nod. They had come a long way from the confrontation that had once divided them. Each had grown in ways they hadn't anticipated, their lives forever changed by a single, fateful moment. In the end, Marcus's legacy wasn't just about his story. It was about the change he had inspired in others, the seeds of empathy and resilience he had planted, and the countless lives he had touched along the way. In this final act, Marcus's journey reaches its resolution as he finds fulfillment in his advocacy, inspiring his community to embrace empathy and respect. Karen's quiet acknowledgement of her wrongs symbolizes the impact of Marcus's strength and integrity, showing that true change begins within. Through his efforts, Marcus leaves a legacy that endures, proving that one person's resilience can indeed make a difference. With this conclusion, Marcus's story transforms from a tale of confrontation and pain into one of healing, growth, and lasting impact, offering a powerful reminder of the strength found in empathy, courage, and the pursuit of justice.